But with children, they are still evolving, they are still growing, they're still changing biologically. So that grief will be re experienced with these milestones in life. The difference between kids grieving and adults grieving. When adults grieve, we tend to experience that grief, we tend to experience that moment and hold on to and have to work through that moment and the impact that it has to us going forward in our future. We've talked about the loss of identity. You talk about kind of the loss of that future that you had with your person or the thing that you're grieving. But because as adults, we're in this different frame of mind, not only like biologically, how our minds are more developed than children, but where we are in our life and the impact that that loss has going forward in our life. While adults do experience new stages, right? You could go from single to married, renter to homeowner. There are life shifts as an adult, but they're just different than children. They're not as drastic. With kids, they experience that loss, say, at a young age, but then each year changes for them. If you could think back to when you were a child, each year just felt like this significant amount of growth and shift and change in the evolution of who you were as you were becoming a full formed adult. And the way that grief works with adults is we will carry forward that experience of that loss, and it will shape and mold our future and who we are going forward. But with children, they are still evolving, they are still growing, they're still changing biologically. So that grief will be re experienced with these milestones in life. It's going to be re experienced as they go through different evolutions of who they are as they become an adult. Maybe that initial loss, they work through that a little bit and they start to find their new normal and they begin to exist within that framework of their loss. But then next year, there could be something new that is coming up, something new that is significant with their grief. And they're going to re experience that loss in a new way. And you can think about from a biological standpoint, you can think about it from the evolution standpoint of their life and becoming an adult in some of these big events. Somebody who lost their parent or a significant loss in their life when they were in middle school is going to look very different when they go into high school, when they drive for the first time, when they have a partner, a girlfriend or boyfriend for the first time, when they graduate, when they have a father daughter dance, or if they even do those anymore. There are all these really big things that children will have. And as their mind is shifting and changing and growing, and they're experiencing the world and they're learning about the world, their grief is going to shift and mold. And we have to be patient. We have to be kind with them. And we have to know that if something seemed settled and worked through at one time, that could be unsettled and shift and morph another time. And I think we experience as adults too, but it is so much more with children. And they need to be allowed to express what is happening, and they need to know that it's okay if things come up again and they feel very significant. It's okay if all of a sudden they're re-experiencing that loss like it's the first time again because of everything that they're going through and who they're becoming. For my kids, I just try to give them space and occasionally ask questions. How are they experiencing the loss of their mom? How does it show up in their lives? I remember this past Mother's Day asking them, how often do you think about mommy? And they're like, yeah, every once in a while. And I was very taken back by that because for me, it's a daily thing. I'm constantly thinking about my loss. I'm constantly thinking about Ariana. And I would expect they would too, essentially projecting that onto them, thinking, oh, surely they wake up every day and they're like, fuck, my mom's not here. But it's just expressed differently through them. So it's having those conversations and allowing ourselves the freedom to give our children space to tell us how they're experiencing the loss and not projecting onto them or not expecting them to either be wildly heartbroken or not heartbroken or thinking that they should be expressing it in one way or another, because We don't know what it's like to live in this day and age as a child, to experience the loss they experienced. I don't know what it's like to lose my mom at a young age. I don't know what it's like to be a child right now. And I think it's important that if we feel like they should be having a big reaction to something and they don't, that they that we allow them to be okay with not having a big reaction. We don't need to place expectations on them for, no, this should hurt, this should be a big thing, or this shouldn't be a big thing, because maybe something small feels really big to them and their grief hits them in a certain way. And I think it's just important that we allow them to have the reactions that they need to, and just trust that if we keep open dialogue with them and we keep giving space, whether they want to take it or not, that eventually they will share the truth of what is happening with them. Something that I have experienced with my kids, and I've heard others who experience this too, is understanding, in the same way that we spoke last week about anger and grief, and understanding the differences between if it's anger or grief, is knowing, is what our kids are experiencing grief, or is this just fucking normal kid shit that they're going through? And I have found it is so easy for me to jump to grief and to be like, oh, you're acting this way, you're feeling this way, you're having this experience because of your loss. It's easy for that to become a scapegoat. And I've experienced, and I've heard from other parents as well, that it's easy for children to just be like, oh, well, this is my grief, because they have experienced that at such a deep level, probably deeper than any other emotions that they've experienced, other heavy emotions. So if maybe they're experiencing anxiety or fear or anger or something else that's kind of secondary, and the only thing that they can think of, the only language, the only words that they have is, well, it's grief. And that's what they tell us. So it's this two-way street of like, we're saying that everything is grief and they're telling us that everything is grief. And what I realized is that I think there's a lot of moments that they're just kids experiencing shit as kids. When I'm able, because I fail a lot at this, I try to take time to tease it apart as best as I can with them through conversation and exploring kind of what's happening. They're not always willing, and I don't always have the patience or energy. And that's the truth. It's fucking hard to do this. But I think if you can find moments that the stars align, that you have the energy, and your children are willing to listen and share, it's important to begin to tease these things apart and help give our children a new language to what they're experiencing, new language to their emotions, which will allow them to better understand, is this grief, or is this just life? Because the thing that I'm so afraid of is every bad thing will be blamed for their grief. And that's not true. Bad shit's going to happen no matter what. And I want them to be able to feel empowered that they can take action and they can get themselves out of that bad situation, those bad emotions, anything that we put quote unquote bad or negative to, and feel empowered that they have agency over it and choices over it. And that it's not this big, huge grief monster that's been put on them that they have no control over. We do have control over our grief, but I think it can feel harder to have control over that because we didn't ask for that. They didn't ask for them to lose their mother. My kids didn't ask for that. They didn't want it. And there are things that happen in life that we don't want, but there's something particularly heinous about grief. It just alters our mind state and it feels so different. I want to help give my kids language and to experience different emotions and to know I'm feeling angry because my friends did this thing, or I got a bad grade, or I hate school, or I don't want to eat that food. Like whatever it is, from big and small, whatever the magnitude, that they can better understand how it's presenting in their body, presenting in their thoughts. So that way, when the grief does hit, that they have a better grip on it to be able to sit with it and experience it. Because the best thing we can do for our grief is to just allow it to sit there when it needs to, and to allow it to express what it needs to. But not all things in life are like that. Understanding the difference between just normal human kid experiencing life shit versus grief. It's also, unfortunately, one of the areas that I struggle with the most, but it is definitely something that I try to be very aware of. And it is one of the best gifts that I can give to my kids.